The evening had turned colder than expected, and the wind carried the scent of rain over the narrow road that cut between fields left fallow since harvest. A ranger's truck slowed to a crawl, headlights skimming across the ditch where something moved. At first it seemed like nothing more than a bundle of shadows, until the ranger, a man named Hayes, noticed the unmistakable outline of a puppy standing stiff against the light. Its fur was matted with dust, ears pricked, eyes too large for its frail body. Yet what struck him most was the way the pup's stance shifted, not to flee, not to beg, but to guard. Its small body was planted before a faded backpack half buried in weeds, as though it carried the weight of something far larger than itself. Hayes had seen abandoned animals before. He'd worked rescue calls for years. Strays on highways, dogs dumped at riverbeds, kittens stuffed into crates and left behind. Most greeted headlights with either panic or desperate hope. But this puppy was different. It gave a low growl, not more than a tremor in its throat, and planted its paws in the mud. The pack behind it looked ordinary, weather-beaten and zipped shut, but the pup's devotion to it felt unnatural. Hayes cut the engine, and the night swallowed the sound, leaving only the whistle of wind and the faint rattle of dry grass. He could feel, in that hush, a presence heavier than the scene before him. He reached for his flashlight and stepped out, boots pressing into damp soil. The beam lit the puppy's eyes, twin reflections that flared and then steadied, as if even light itself was unwelcome so close to its post. Hayes crouched low, murmuring the same gentle words he used with frightened strays, but the pup gave no ground. It trembled, not with fear, but with the strain of holding its position. The backpack shifted slightly in the wind, and Hayes noticed then the scuff marks along the canvas, as though it had been dragged far, a strap frayed almost to breaking. Whatever lay inside, the puppy guarded as if it were alive. From the roadside, a passing couple slowed their steps. They lived in a farmhouse nearby and recognized Hayes from his patrols. The woman clutched her shawl tighter and whispered, "Why won't it move?" Hayes shook his head. The man squinted toward the backpack and muttered something about trouble, about leaving it be, but his voice held unease rather than conviction. The three of them stood there, separated by little more than a ditch, yet none stepped forward. The puppy's presence held them back as surely as a locked gate. Time stretched. The sky deepened to indigo, and with it came the subtle sounds of night, a distant owl, the faint trickle of water from an unseen ditch. Hayes felt the weight of a decision pressing on him. Years of experience told him that backpacks by roadsides never carried good stories. People left them for reasons that stained memory. Yet here was a living creature, clinging to one as if its soul were bound inside. He studied the puppy again, ribs showing beneath thin fur, paws raw from wear, but its eyes steady, as if it knew what no one else yet dared to ask. The couple exchanged uneasy glances, then turned for home, unwilling to watch longer. Hayes remained. He inched closer, careful not to startle the animal. The puppy gave a bark, sharp but broken, the sound of something that had barked too long at shadows. Then silence returned, heavier than before. Hayes stopped only a few feet away, close enough to see the zipper's teeth glint in the flashlight beam, close enough to notice that the pack bulged in a way that suggested it held more than clothes or supplies. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, a scent that didn't belong in the middle of a field. He stood there, torn between instinct and hesitation, the weight of the moment pressing like the night itself. The puppy lowered its head over the pack, shoulders tight, as if bracing against a storm only it could sense. Hayes let the beam of his light fall away, leaving the ditch in near darkness once more. For a long breath nothing moved, not the grass, not the air, not the dog. It was a silence that carried questions too heavy for one man to answer alone. The moment stretched, fragile, waiting. The ditch lay in near darkness, the flashlight beam now resting against Hayes's thigh. His breath formed a faint cloud in the cooling air, and he could hear the faint drip of water where the soil met the road. The puppy hadn't moved, its frail chest pressed against the canvas of the backpack, eyes watching him with an intensity that seemed older than its body. For a moment, Hayes thought of turning back to his truck, calling this into animal control and letting someone else make the choice. But the night pressed too heavily for retreat. Something here demanded witness. He shifted his weight, the gravel crunching beneath his boot. The puppy flinched but didn't yield. its lips pulled back, exposing small, uneven teeth. Hayes murmured softly again, words without meaning but carrying the shape of calm. The wind rose, tugging at the grass, and the backpack gave a faint, hollow sound as if something inside shifted against the canvas. The noise froze both man and pup. Hayes felt the hairs rise at the back of his neck. He had thought the pack inanimate, forgotten. Now it felt alive, or at least weighted with something that refused to be forgotten. He crouched, lowering his frame, trying to meet the pup's eyes without threat. The dog's legs trembled under its own stubborn stance. Hunger had carved valleys along its ribs, yet the force holding it here was stronger than need. Hayes wondered what grief or loyalty could root even the smallest creature to such devotion. His chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He had once owned a dog that had stood guard over him through an illness, refusing to leave the foot of his bed for nights. That memory pulled forward now, unbidden, stirring something both tender and raw. The night seemed to draw closer. A low hum of crickets filled the silence, their rhythm broken only by the creak of tree branches overhead. Hayes extended a hand toward the ground, palm down, giving the puppy the choice to approach. Instead, the animal pressed tighter against the backpack as though merging itself with it. Its eyes glimmered, not with ferocity but with the desperate plea of something that could not speak. Hayes felt the message in his bones more than in his mind. Do not take this from me. Still, duty pulled at him. Whatever lay inside the pack might explain why the animal was here, why it starved itself in defense of nothing more than canvas and zippers. He leaned slightly forward, fingers brushing against the frayed strap. The pup snapped, teeth grazing air, but its body faltered after the attempt, too weak to maintain the show of strength. Hayes pulled back, not out of fear, but respect. He let the silence stretch, listening. In that moment he thought he caught another sound, faint, muffled, impossible to place. It came from the backpack itself, though so slight it could have been a trick of the wind. His throat went dry. He scanned the fields around him, suddenly conscious of how isolated the road was. The farmhouse lights had gone dark in the distance, and the couple was long gone. Hayes stood alone with this small creature and its vigil, a barrier between him and whatever secret the backpack contained. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them settling, all of them heavy. He glanced at the sky. The clouds had thickened, swallowing what remained of the stars. The air pressed down as if urging a decision he wasn't ready to make. The puppy shifted, curling slightly but keeping one paw across the zipper pull, as if it had learned from humans what gesture could guard best. Hayes swallowed hard, realizing he was no longer facing an ordinary stray. This was something closer to a sentinel, and he could not yet decide whether it protected what was within, or those outside from seeing it. The wind fell suddenly still, leaving only the sound of Hayes's own heartbeat drumming in his ears. He bent closer, his shadow merging with the ditch, until his hand hovered once more above the worn canvas. The puppy gave a final low whine, softer this time, a note of exhaustion rather than threat. Hayes hesitated, his fingers inches from the truth, knowing that whatever lay inside would not only answer questions, but alter the night beyond recognition. He let his hand drop against his knee, drawing in a breath that trembled in his chest. The silence pressed harder, waiting. Then, from deep within the backpack came the faintest sound. Not the scrape of objects shifting, not the creak of fabrics, but something softer. A muffled cry, fragile as breath, that froze Hayes where he knelt. The moment stretched. Fragile, waiting. Hayes kept the flashlight lowered, letting the ditch breathe in darkness again. The puppy's outline was a small hill against the pack, a living barricade that rose and fell with careful breaths. The wind slid over the fields, carrying the smell of damp earth and old straw, and somewhere far off, a gate creaked on its hinge. He listened for engines, footsteps, anything to make the decision for him. Nothing, only the hush of grass and the dog's determined stillness. He spoke softly, not to coax, just to mark his presence in a tone that asked for permission more than it expected obedience. He'd learned to respect thresholds, doorways where frightened animals chose between trust and flight, moments where a wrong move turned hope into disaster. The puppy's ears twitched, but it didn't shift. Hayes eased one knee to the mud, keeping his hands open, palms visible. The smell of the backpack reached him more clearly now. Canvas, wet dust, and a thin metal tang that pressed at the back of his tongue. He felt the quiet prickle along his skin that came when instinct said time mattered more than caution. He raised the radio to his shoulder and kept his voice low. Unit 7, requesting vet support at mile marker 12, East Farm Road. One juvenile dog guarding a bag. Possible. Contents. He didn't finish the sentence. Dispatch answered in a whisper of static, then the calm voice of a woman he'd worked with for a decade. Copy, Hayes. 10 minutes. He set the radio down and exhaled, feeling the weight of that number. 10 minutes could be an hour, depending on what waited behind a zipper. A cloud moved across the moon and the road dimmed. The puppy shifted its hind leg at last, dragging its paw closer without breaking its shield. In the flashlight's spill, Hayes saw raw skin along the pad, scraped, swollen, and a smear of dried mud turned the color of rust. The dog had pulled the pack, he realized. Not for a few yards, but a long way. The scuff trail hid beneath bent grass and tire grooves. Whatever lay inside, the puppy had worked the road like a mule, alone. He took off his jacket, folded it, and set it on the ground a foot away. The pup's eyes flicked to it, measuring. He slid a small bowl from his kit, poured water. When the dog didn't come, he pushed the bowl with 2 fingers until the rim kissed the edge of the backpack. The puppy glanced at him once, then lowered its chin to drink without stepping aside, tongue careful, almost apologetic. A tiny shiver ran through its shoulders and was gone. Headlights teased the far bend, then vanished as if the night had swallowed them. Hayes felt his chest tighten. Vehicles meant people, and people brought noise, questions, impatience. He eased closer by inches, speaking in that steady, tired voice older animals trusted, the one that told them he knew what hurt and wouldn't make it worse. The puppy's ears flattened, a tremor passing through its thin frame, but it did not bare its teeth. It was guarding, yes, but not against him. It was guarding time. He rested a hand on the dirt and felt moisture wick into his skin. The air carried a hint of milk, faint, almost imagined, threaded with the iron scent he couldn't shake. He angled the flashlight slightly, letting light lick along the zipper. Something had tugged at it from inside. The teeth were skewed. A single stitch snapped and curled. He frowned. For a breath, the world tightened to that silver line and the dog's breath fogging it. The fields, the road, the sky, they fell away. Feet crunched gravel behind him. He didn't turn. Mara's steps were like that, precise, unhurried. She stopped at the shoulder, and he sensed her take the scene in the way she always did. Listening first, seeing second, speaking last. "How long?" she asked, voice low enough to belong to the wind. "Long enough to matter," he answered. She crouched beside him, kept her hands where the puppy could read them, and murmured something that sounded like a memory instead of a command. Mara took the jacket he'd folded and wormed it under the bowl to steady it. The puppy watched her with an adult's attention, the kind that weighed choices and costs. As the cloud thinned and moonlight skimmed the ditch again, Hayes saw the dog more clearly. A soft ridge of fur along the spine where a collar had rubbed raw and been removed or ripped away, a small tick of pain each time it put weight on the front leg. It had every reason to withdraw into the tall grass and leave the world behind, yet it stayed, one small spine against fear. "What do you smell?" Mara asked. He gave the honest answer. "Metal, maybe milk. I don't know." Her eyes shifted to the zipper, then to the tremor in the dog's flank. They shared a look that belonged to people who had seen too many bad endings and still came back for another try. Without moving closer, she slid a strip of gauze from her pocket and laid it on the ground, inch by inch, until it was within the puppy's reach. It sniffed it and did nothing more, but its breathing slowed half a measure, as if the clean cloth meant something it could not name. The wind picked up and the grass whispered, each blade a breath. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, a nightbird gave a single call and fell quiet again. Hayes pressed his fingers into the soil, as if anchoring himself to the simple fact of it. He had lost a dog once by rushing at the wrong second, a sandy mutt on a bridge who spiraled into moving water when a stranger shouted from a car. Memory chilled him and he let it. Fear could be a teacher. He waited, counted the dog's breaths, felt the 10 minutes collapsing into a choice he would have to own. Mara angled her face toward the puppy and said one word, a soft syllable that meant nothing and everything. "Okay." She didn't ask. She offered the word like a hand left open on a table. Slowly, Hayes raised the flashlight so the beam fell not on the puppy, not on the full length of the pack, but just on the zipper head, a tiny glint, the least threatening thing in the scene. The puppy looked at the light, then at them, then set its chin more firmly over the canvas. It closed its eyes once, opened them again, and in that quiet gesture he felt an old, human ache. The moment you trust, because not trusting will break what you're trying to save. He reached forward. The zipper tab was cold against his fingertip. The dog did not move. When he drew back a fraction, testing, something answered from deep inside the pack. Not loud, not clear, just a tremble against the canvas and the barest breath of sound, as fragile as a moth against glass. Hayes froze, the wind holding its breath with him, as the sound came once more and then fell to silence, leaving the road, the field, and the two of them alone with the weight of what they now knew. The silence pressed down, thick as the night itself, when the puppy shifted its weight, nose pressed hard against the backpack's canvas as if willing it to stay closed. Hayes steadied his breath, the chill biting through his jacket. He could feel the decision hovering, the knowledge that one small action would change the course of whatever story had begun here. Then, without warning, the pup let out a sound so raw it seemed to tear from its chest. Not a bark, not a whine, but something closer to grief. The wind rose in response, stirring the weeds along the ditch. It carried the scent of damp earth and something faintly acrid, a whisper of what the pack contained. Hayes froze, unsettled by how the world seemed to shift around that cry. He had heard dogs plead for food, for freedom, for touch, but never this. This was a call for what could not return. He reached out, his hand brushing the rough strap, and felt the puppy's trembling body press harder against it, torn between defiance and collapse. A memory flickered in Hayes's mind. Years earlier, finding a dog abandoned with nothing but a child's blanket. He remembered the way it clung to the fabric, teeth gnashing at anyone who tried to remove it. That same desperation shone now in the pup's eyes, and Hayes understood in part, though not fully, what it was telling him. Whatever lay inside the pack, it was not simply cargo. It was the center of the pup's world. The beam of his flashlight caught on a faint stain along the canvas, a dark patch too deep to be soil. His throat tightened. He almost pulled back, almost let the night swallow the question whole. But then came the sound, faint, muffled, unmistakable, from inside the pack itself. Not movement, not words, but a shift, as though silence had given way to breath. Hayes leaned closer, heart quickening while the puppy's small body stiffened once more. The world held still. The faint shift inside the backpack held the night in suspension. Hayes's hand trembled on the strap as the puppy pressed tighter, its body quivering with a mixture of defiance and dread. The ranger drew a long breath, then pulled the zipper open with a careful, steady hand. The sound cut through the still air like a blade. Inside, wrapped in a worn blanket, lay a child's belongings. A pair of shoes far too small for the world, a folded drawing scrawled in bright crayon, and beneath them, the soft weight of something fragile, a baby's bottle, its contents long soured, its plastic stained. No living breath greeted them, only the echo of what had once been. The sound Hayes had heard had been nothing more than the blanket settling under his touch, yet its silence felt heavier than any cry could. The puppy lowered its head into the open pack, nosing gently at the shoes before curling its body across the blanket, as though reclaiming what little remained. Its chest rose and fell in short, shuddering waves. Hayes could see now that the animal had not been guarding for protection alone. It had been guarding for memory, for a bond no one else could touch. The ranger's throat tightened. He could not summon words. They would have felt false against such devotion. Instead, he crouched beside the dog and let the moment linger. The wind had eased, and in its absence came the faint rustle of crickets, a sound of ordinary life returning to an extraordinary silence. For a long time, neither man nor animal moved. Hayes thought of the parents who must have packed this bag, of the journey it had taken to end here in a ditch beside a field, and of the tiny guardian who had refused to leave it behind. He thought, too, of the world's quiet cruelties, of how easily stories were left unfinished, and of how sometimes only an animal's loyalty bore witness to the end. At last, Hayes reached out and touched the pup's back. This time, it did not resist. It lay still, its small frame slack with exhaustion, but its eyes never strayed from the blanket. There was no victory in that moment, no relief, only the weight of a truth accepted. Hayes gathered both pup and pack in his arms, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two survivors carrying the same burden forward. The road stretched quiet and empty as he returned to his truck. Above the fields, the sky had begun to pale at the edges, first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. In that changing light, the ditch no longer looked like a place of abandonment, but rather a threshold, the end of one story, the uncertain beginning of another. As Hayes placed the pup gently on the seat beside him, the animal curled once more against the backpack. It closed its eyes, not in defeat, but in the fragile comfort of still being near what it had loved. Hayes started the engine, the hum low and steady, carrying them both away from the lonely roadside. Outside, the wind moved again, bending the grass until it whispered like voices at rest. In its sway, the field erased the scene, leaving only a small paw print pressed into the mud, a quiet mark of loyalty that would soon fade, but never fully disappear.